Well, welcome to BA377. This is going to be operations management. Obviously, I wish I could be there today. Unfortunately, on the road due to situation outside of my control. So, we'll make the best of it, though. I'll review this stuff again next week, but I want to give you an introduction, so at least we don't lose a week here. Management and all this stuff. It's pretty interesting stuff. My background, I was a military guy. I was a flyer flying F4s and F-15Es. Moved up to Alaska several years ago. Anyway, raised some Vizslas. Have a couple 3-horses now. A few daughters. One of the old F4s I used to fly. I actually shot that F4 down. Long story, but anyway, I was flying a different aircraft. Dakota there in the bottom left. That's one of the new horses. She was born this summer. And Bailey there, the Vizsla, she had some pups this summer too. So, anyway, I look forward to meeting you all in person, and we'll talk more about other stuff next week. But like I say, I started out probably first 10 years or so as a flyer, and then the rest of it was doing more stuff that's sort of the focus of this class. And got my degrees primarily while overseas. I spent at least 14 years out of that group. Overseas in Europe, also down in Turkey, a lot of time in the Middle East, but primarily Germany, Spain, and Turkey. The course makeup, the big thing on this is the standard number of tests and all that, but keep in mind that that 30% that's comprised of the homework and the attendance, that's stuff that's completely under your control. So realistically, if you do the homework as necessary, and make a good attempt on it, and get it turned in, you'll get your 20 points. In addition, the 10% for attendance, again, under your control. You're allowed to miss a class, but if you're going to miss any classes, please follow up with an email too to let me know what's going on, if we're expecting to be excused. If there's some sort of situation. I don't have necessarily a problem with that, but I just need to know beforehand, or even if it's after the fact, I just need the email, because when I go to do the compilation for grades and all, you all may be well gone, so it's helpful to always use email on that. Operations management, most of you are probably familiar at least with a little bit of the term. Really, it has to do with the process of turning goods and services into outputs, and we'll touch on a lot of different things. Quality, not quality in terms of, well, there's lots of definitions to quality, but we'll be looking at quality in terms of operations, in terms of the effect that will have on the processes. Again, we'll spend a lot more time on that as we go. One thing I won't be testing on so much in this course is things like this, where it's just a strict list. This is some of the topics we're going to be talking about in terms of operations management, how it's actually done. So we'll spend time on human resources, a lot of time on inventory and supply chain management type things, and maintenance, and to the degree that will affect the process and ensure your capability to deliver the output as required. As part of the course, and also as part of the attendance, usually have a video clip associated with the course. I probably will show you this one next week. It just has to do with Frito-Lay, but it's a little bit more interesting to bring in some industry type examples. And Frito-Lay, like their products or not, they've got a pretty challenging business where you have to essentially take case of most of their products, potatoes, from the field to the shelves, and sometimes they're able to do that in a couple, 3 days, which is pretty amazing. And then also there's a lot of their supply chain, their distribution, everything is pretty involved, and they're pretty well run companies, so we'll talk more about them. In chapter 1, just operations and productivity. So what do managers do? I hate these kind of slides with the clip art on there, but my apologies, but you have a pretty good idea, and again, we aren't going to specify a list, but managers do those tasks to an accomplishment of their job. So, critical decisions. What good or service should we offer? Things like that, decisions like that, really, if it can't be tied back to the customer, it's probably not a valid, matter. The customer is what drives everything in quality and should drive everything. Sorry about this. Get that thing out of the way. So that's the defining characteristic of any operation. For managing quality, how do we define quality? I touched on this just a little bit before. Quality does not always mean the most expensive, the fanciest, the whatever. A mid-range hotel chain could institute quality processes, and that does not necessarily mean that they have, the most expensive, the most opulent rooms. It just means that their operation encompasses a lot of the quality principles in terms of empower employees, focus on the customer, all those kind of things. So, make more sense as we go. Slide. Come on, dude. Trying to get it to go. Did we lock it up? No way. Stand by. Okay, here we go. Process and capacity design. The capacity, and this also ties back into maintenance, but you need the ability to produce whatever product it is or service in the quantity that's required by the customer. So most products will have what they call a life cycle in terms of an introduction phase, and then a phase where you're going to be making your money, gaining all that capital you invested, and then there's going to be a mature phase, and then it's going to taper out. Well, the key is that this is all time-based, and if you didn't forecast the demand correctly, or for some reason don't have the means available to produce the item in the quantity desired, you're endangering the company. I mean, you're going to, in the very least, leave some money on the table, but more likely, that product's going to be phased out or even obsolete in case of high-tech items, and you never got the money back from that product. So that works. Location strategy. This depends on what type of facility it is. If it's a manufacturing type facility, yeah, it's all about cost. You want something in a cheap location with cheap labor and all the rest of that. If it's a revenue or service-based, venture, then you want to be where you're going to be able to derive the maximum amount of money for folks. And cost is a secondary consideration because the revenue will be so much higher in some of the highly profitable locations that you're willing to absorb those costs. Layout strategy. This has to do, well, it does work in a service, but also in manufacturing. And what they're talking about here is sort of like the production floor, how things would be set up to most efficiently produce the product, how things can be laid out, and how that can affect the process. Human resources. Anybody who's worked in a restaurant or any kind of business, but especially labor-intensive type service ventures, human resources, people always underestimate the complexity and just the effect that these, the human resources, that people are so much more complex than machines. Anyway, people fail to grasp that, and that can be their downfall. Supply chain management. It's not only the make or buy decision, whether a company should do this internally or buy it from a vendor, but there's just a whole strategy and in terms of efficiency. And it does tie in with the next one, which is inventory. And it's particularly we'll be talking about that JIT, just in time. So, again, getting back to quality, if you want a product that's continuously improving, you can't have warehouses full of the old product. Also you could have defects in that warehouse and other issues where you don't want to be holding on a product. If you do hold product, you end up being sort of like a Circuit City or somebody who flails and then finally goes out of business because they're holding inventory that's basically perishable, not to mention that they finance it, they're insuring it, there's some pilferage, there's just all sorts of bad things that happen with inventory. Planning, scheduling, we'll talk about that in terms of how best to get that done. And then maintenance, again, maintenance, what we'll look at is again how it ties back into production and capacity. You know, you can have some great forecasting for what the capacity is that you need, but if the machinery isn't able to deliver the capacity, then it's all for naught. So maintenance is critical, and there's some pretty big impacts, and especially with technology, some things you can do to have a big impact on that. This isn't a history course, so we won't have dates and necessarily people's names in here, but there's been an evolution in operations management, and particularly again getting back into quality. But what has happened is a lot of it has been enabled by technology. People have always, quality is just basically common sense. That you would continuously improve a product, that you would, empower employees, that you would want designs to keep up to date. Well, a lot of that is pretty difficult to do, especially back in other times where you had drafting boards and you had this exacting change process that required a bunch of documents. There was resistance to continuing to improve products. Well, with technology, that's not a problem. And then customization, with the internet and people being able to reach in and actually order products specifically like they want and not have that be a time-consuming or expensive process for the company, that's something new and something that's would have always been desired but can only now be implemented. Deming is one of the key folks in this, and he's mentioned here down there on the last line. But one of the issues too, if you read in the book or you read anything about quality, we'll talk about Toyota and a lot of the Asian firms, and specifically in Japan where quality was instituted, and that is true. But a lot of those principles really were derived from Deming and some of these other folks, and some of the U.S. companies, and whatever you want to blame it on for, arrogance or just being kind of settled in the market. But anyway, they kind of let that stuff slip, and well, they've never been able to recover. New challenges. Some of these are new. Some of these are just more of a PR kind of blitz. I also work as a consultant for Booz Allen Hamilton, and do some strategic communications for them, and a lot of times you look on the right side here, and we're looking at some of these facets in terms of global focus and supply chain part. Sometimes some of these are more buzzwords rather than actual developments. Again, technology has changed. The things have become more global due to better shipping and obviously much better communications. But we'll talk about all these different changes as they go. The field does evolve, but we'll go in more depth next week. Characteristics of goods and services. I think this is fairly evident to most folks. Goods are tangible items, something you can touch. They can be inventoried. It has certain. What's important in this course is the difference between goods and services. You can do certain things with goods and certain things with services. Services, they're the intangibles, and also they're in the case of this, you can't inventory services. Think about a haircut, for example. You can't put haircuts on a shelf. They aren't goods. There's high customer interaction, and it's hard to define quality also in terms of a haircut. What's good and what's pleasing to one customer, is completely unacceptable to the next. So anyway, goods and services, basically tangible versus intangible, and the different attributes in terms of customer interaction. It's no secret that services have gained greatly in terms of percentages as manufacturing starts to decline. So manufacturing has obviously gone to some of the lower wage countries, and that's a natural progression. You can't necessarily fight that. One trend is the use of robotics, though, and further automation that diminishes the actual dollar value of labor. So it may bring some manufacturing back. It does make industrialized countries more competitive if the labor is, well, not actually labor, if it turns to machine hours because of automation. Another chart, and actually it shows it going off the chart in terms of employment. So manufacturing, even manufacturing has gone to other countries, but also the manufacturing that remains as it becomes more automated. The number of folks involved in terms of employment is going to go down, and services obviously is going to climb. There are, some services. Look at travel agents. Look at banking. A lot of those things also can be automated. So, they're going to have their own changes. Manufacturing employment, again, industrial production has gone up. So productivity and production has gone through the roof, even though there's fewer people involved. Again, automation and mechanization. So there are some challenges. Ethics and regulations not at the forefront. I don't know. There's always a tendency for people to say, oh yeah, they're all very stupid before us, and we're very enlightened now. So I'm not necessarily gonna buy off on that, but there are some things though specifically in terms of communication and sort of a global image that have emerged because of better communications. And there are some companies, some bad actors that I think were definitely the minority even back then, but they did some things that clearly they would never do now. For example, there's a company called Union Carbide that 30 years ago in Bhopal, India, had a manufacturing plant using some standards that it would not have met U.S. standards. They were making pesticide. Anyway, huge disaster. A lot of folks were killed, and this was Bhopal, India. And so, if a company did that today, it hurt that company then, but it would be, that company would basically be out of business if they did that today, because people basically won't put up with that, and people will know about that due to global communications and the news cycles and all the rest of that. So there are some good things that come from that. Local national focus to global focus, somewhat, and lengthy product development. This is a huge change, but I don't know that it's necessarily a challenge. It's a huge benefit. So, and it does mean that the products can be updated quite quickly. Public sensitivity for low-cost environment. Yeah, sometimes, especially some of these ISO type things, I don't know if you know the history of that, but it's a standardization, quality standardization, and basically, products, if somebody is ISO certified, some places, especially within the EU, the European Union, that would not buy products that weren't ISO certified. So it almost ended up being a protectionism type thing where it was justification for not buying products from certain areas, and again, it was kind of a false trade barrier. So not a great strategy there. Low cost, standardized products, rise of consumerism, mass customization. So again, that's been enabled by technology. Now you can essentially get a product specifically as you want it, but it has raised consumers' expectations now, so especially if you go off on the internet and you see something exactly like you want, you go to a brick and mortar store, your chances of finding that exact item are probably pretty slim. So it's made some challenges for the brick and mortar stores for sure. Employees, yes, and we'll go through all of these in over the course when we go to each section, but yeah, the empowering employees and making employees feel a little bit more important to the processes has always been smart business. Rapid technological change in terms of the buying process, supply chain process, correct, and shorter product life cycles. The product life cycles have shortened a bit, but the just-in-time performance and continuous improvement, that's been again, these are ideas and concepts that have always been acknowledged as you know, great improvements, but it was just the technology and the automation did not allow them to be implemented. Again, the same sort of list that we just spoke about. And we'll review these slides. I'll go through them pretty quickly next week just to make sure, find out if anybody had any questions on what the different items were. Productivity. So productivity is the ratio of outputs divided by the inputs. So object is obviously to improve productivity. So measure of output only, not a measure of efficiency. So again, just from the straight math. What they're showing here is the transformation. Obviously the inputs, the transformation, and productivity has gone up greatly. Now they're going to attribute this productivity to management. Depends how you define management. But anyway, a lot of it has to do with automation. Now, any of these improvements in productivity, you also have to be cognizant that you have to look at these improvements as improvements to the customer. If it's just shaving seconds off, unless that translates into some sort of benefit to the customer, then it's not in his best interest. In this case, in Starbucks, people paying $5 for a cup of coffee. If it becomes more of an assembly line and they're just shoving coffee at you, you're likely to go someplace else. But some of these things that are a win-win for the customer, that they should be implemented, like not requiring the signatures on credit card purchases of $25. I think it's up to 50 now. But anyway, that is kind of less hassle for everybody involved. But if they start reducing sizes or doing things like that, or the espresso machine being faster, but if it changes the coffee, anyway, you just have to be careful that if you look at these two things in too sterile of an environment and diminish the value added to the customer, you're not doing yourself any favors. So a lot of these examples we'll talk about are these time management studies and other studies on these large firms. And so you shave a few seconds off of one Starbucks and you multiply that by the thousands of Starbucks, and then you've got some real savings. If it's a smaller operation, obviously the value of doing an in-depth time study is probably going to be diminished. But for the big players, it definitely makes sense to shave every second off. Productivity. So again, just like we said, units produced divided by the input used. So not too much there. How to do the calculations. So if you're faced with a math problem, they say, okay, this guy's producing, say, manhole covers, big steel discs, and he can produce 16 of them in an hour. Well, if he can produce 17 in an hour, then obviously productivity's gone up. Or if he can produce 16 in 45 minutes, productivity's gone up. So anyway, it's always going to be this ratio. What you want is for productivity to improve, you want either the output to stay the same and the inputs to be reduced, or the input to stay the same and the output to be increased. So you can make it a little bit more complex by adding in some of the other factors other than just labor. Quality may change while the quantity of inputs and outputs remains constant. Sure. And external outputs. There's always, any of these studies, there's many times external factors that greatly affect what's going on and may affect the productivity. And we'll look at some examples in the class. So here's where they attribute this. Management contributes about 52% of the annual increase. Obviously, the book's written by managers, so they give labor 10%, capital 38%, but management 52%. Anyway, you can look down there at the bottom slide on the right. Some of the robotics. I actually happen to be down in the south right now, and drove by the Kia factory last night, and I was involved with some folks who were putting some of the machinery in there, and it's a fairly well automated plant, and everybody in terms of, every one of those manufacturers is represented within probably a few hundred miles of Alabama. Alabama seems to have a whole lot of car manufacturing now, but anyway, it's all state of the art, all fairly automated and hugely productive. Key variables for improved labor: basic education, appropriate for the labor force, and the rest of this. A labor force that can deliver. Again, drawn upon, like say, experience in Turkey. We had folks, stable guy. He would work out with my horses, and he was paid $7 a day, and that was fairly big money for him. But you ask that guy to work on your car, and that's not going to happen. It's just not within his cultural learning. He did not know those sorts of items. So again, cheap labor doesn't always equate to the best deal. Sometimes there's other factors involved, and we'll discuss that when we go through HR type situations. Service productivity: it's tougher to increase productivity in services because you can't really automate things to the same extent, typically. But if you went to the barber again and you said, yeah, want a haircut, and the person sort of stepped aside and the machine came in and started anyway, you'd probably walk out. So difficult to mechanize, difficult to evaluate for quality, because again, it's quality's kind of in the eyes of the customer, and that customer may have different expectations. So intellectual tasks, true. Anyway. Productivity at Taco Bell. Again, you get an organization like Taco Bell, you make a small change, and it can be huge savings. So, again, they're going to look at just shaving small seconds and 300 million gallons of water. Anyway, if they lose sight of the product for the customer, these numbers are completely artificial, and that's the challenge, is to bring improvement through statistical methods and process analysis, but not lose track of the customer. Ethics and social responsibility. True. Again, though, I don't think that the predecessors were necessarily out to poison the environment or do other things. It was just a different time, a different place. All right, so admittedly that's pretty short. I'm going to keep these YouTube ones pretty short. I'll do a second one for the second half of the chapter, but I want to split this one in a block so that it doesn't overwhelm the system. So this was just part one. Part two will be up in just a few minutes.